Now, first let's clarify the expression a union of states. Okay, so Rahul Gandhi has used this expression to pretend that, you see, India is a conglomerate of states with a separate identity. That's not how India has come about. You see, that's how the European Union has come about. You have a number of countries with their own history, and at some point they throw in their lot together. They make a pact, a contract, and then you get this idea of an ever closer union. They bring in more and more topics into the, united policy. In the beginning it was only coals and steel, and then you see more and more, cultural elements were brought in, and now we have a, pretty close political union. In India, that's not what happened. You could say in history, long ago, you had many more states that gradually grew together or were conquered one by the other. But you see what happened now with the Indian Republic, it has grown out of British India, which was a colonial system with parts controlled by the British Crown and then parts controlled, by remote control through the Maharajas and the Nawabs and so on, who were nominally independent but effectively part of British India. So there was already one united political structure. It was at the same time diversified, but essentially it was one. It was under the British Crown, now it's under the Indian Republic. And so the states were not negotiated with separately. There was no negotiation between, let's say, Mysore and the Indian Republic. No, you see, the Indian Republic said, okay, this is what you have to do. If you join, we impose all this, and you have no say in the matter. And so that's what happened. You see, it's one state that absorbed whatever diversity existed. And so, this idea of union of states is a rather unfortunate expression because it doesn't really describe what has happened. And so it is the United State of India that then formed states as parts of it, as administrative units. Like, for instance, it is the government that accepts, after, in this case, some pressure from below, the formation of the states of Andhra, which was part of a Madras presidency. And so then there is pressure from Poti Sri Ramulu to create a linguistic state, and so then India forms this linguistic state. Later on, India also decides to split up that linguistic state into Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. It decides to split Punjab from Haryana and those things. But so all these things are happening within India. So it's not a union of states in the sense of pre-existing states. Nevertheless, these states have a certain identity of their own, and that linguistic principle has, of course, mightily contributed to that. Now, I think from a democratic viewpoint, these linguistic states are a very good and necessary thing. You see, if you want to debate, what policy to follow, well then, of course, you need a common space for debate, which in practice presupposes a common language. And so, you see, the Tamils go their own way, the Kannadigas go their own way, and that is what you have to live with. You see, there is a certain diversity. Each state has its own identity, but not too much. You see, they are still also all part of India, usually proud of being Indian. But so you have these two levels. You see, a mega level of India as a whole, and then a level, more familiar, more closer to home, with smaller states. Now there, of course, you can quarrel, what is a good size for a state? What dialect should be treated as a separate language and get a separate state? All these small tribal languages, they're not worth a state, but maybe they deserve some level of autonomy, like you have in Russia, for example, in the Soviet Union, whatever else was wrong with it. You see Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his book Rebuilding Russia, which was written after the fall of the Soviet Union. He commends, you see, he praises the fact that in the Soviet Union, different levels of separateness were recognized. You see, some small tribe of a few thousand people, had a lower level of autonomy than a large people had. But still, you see, their separate identity was recognized at some level. So this you could also do in India. Like, for instance, one practical problem that I studied a little bit is Tulu Nadu, the Tulu-speaking region in coastal Karnataka. I don't speak Tulu. I have a few Tulu books which I try to decipher, but I'm never going to get anywhere. But I've been to Mangalore and Udupi a few times. I really love the place. And so I noticed that there is a movement for a separate Tulu-speaking state. And I greatly support it. You see, this is not separatism. In Europe, you had 5 years back or so, this question of Catalan separatism against Spain. And there was a referendum in Catalonia, which had a narrow majority in favor of independence. But you see, Spain blocked it, and the European Union also didn't support it. But in fact, the European Union is the answer to this. You see, because both Spain and Catalonia remain part of the European Union, it doesn't matter if they form separate units. Just like the breakaway of Telangana from Andhra Pradesh was a completely bloodless affair. You see, it just was on the front page of the newspapers for 2 or 3 days, and then it was over. It was digested. Nobody made a fuss about it. And so you see, that is what is possible, and like, Tulu Nadu might separate from Karnataka. Now, I don't think that's really on the cards, because the linguistic situation in Tulu Nadu is quite complex. There are also many Kannada speakers, and there are other languages, and I'm glad I don't have to decide there. But at any rate, I sympathize with the desire of the Tulu speakers for some level of political autonomy of their own. And so similarly with, the tribals in Jharkhand, in Bengal, and so on. 2 days ago I saw this dance performance by a dance troupe from the Santal tribe that the president belongs to. And, they have their little separate culture. Now, I wouldn't mind if to that, corresponds a certain level of political autonomy. And so because of this, this recognition of a certain autonomy to the different, units of the federation, it is only logical that they follow their own political logic, and that therefore their elections do not always coincide with what happens at the federal level. Though, again, here you have to take into account the logistics of organizing these elections and so on. Though, in fact, I have the impression that it is rather an argument against this unification drive. If you want to organize federal elections in India, it's very complicated. You have to deploy units of the army and so on. You can't deploy them all at the same time. So you have different days for these, federal elections. So that rather seems an argument for keeping the present system. So that the elections in Madhya Pradesh and the elections in Rajasthan and so on are each at a different time. Okay, but so that is my foreigner's impression. That is really something that I leave to Indians to decide.